यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्म व्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोस्य दयैकसिन्धो रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये। कौडिन्यवंशवरवारिधिपूर्णचन्द्रं श्रीमत्पराङ्कुशपदाम्बुजभृङ्गराजं रङ्गार्यदेशिकपदाप्तशिदेशिकत्वं श्रीरामकृष्णगुरुवर्यमहं प्रपद्ये। लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसंद्रष्ट जीवजीवातवे नमः। So Jai Shriman Narayan, welcome to this session. We started with Mumuksho Chetanasya. We were talking about what a Mumukshu is. So Jivatma, when I use the word Jivatma and sometimes I use the word Atma, they are both referring to the same thing. So Mumukshu, those who want moksha. So what is moksha? Here moksha is referring to Pashur Manushya Pakshiva Yecha Vaishnava Samtatha Tenaivate Puyasanti Tat Vishnoho Paramam Padam. To reach that Vishnu, Paramam Padam, attainment of Bhagavana is moksha here. So moksha siddha, mokshat patyai tattvatraya jnanam apekshitam. For moksha, to attain Bhagavan Shriman Narayan, you must understand these three basic tattvas or elements, parts. So Chitta, Achitta and Ishvara. So we have started by understanding Chitta first. So to understand something else, you must try and understand yourself first. So that is the idea, and that is the reason why we have Chitta before Achitta and Ishvara. Chidit Atmochyate Atma Swarupam Gatva Gatvottarottaram we had mentioned. Ityukta Prakarena Dehendriya Manha Prana Buddhibhyo Vilakshanam. It is different from this Deha, Manas, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahamkara and so on. The Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya is different from that. So what is it? How is it? So we said Ajadam, Anandarupam, Anu, Nityam, Achintyam, Niravayavam, Nirvikaram, Jnanashraya Bhutam, Ishwaranyamyam, and Dharyam and Sesham. So these are the qualities that we had mentioned. And we were going through each of these qualities one after the other. Right? And what is Anandarupam? Anandarupam Sukha Swarupatvam. Anandam means to be able to feel. Right? Sukha Swarupam. To be able to distinguish feeling good and feeling bad, to be able to observe, to be able to bring to cognizance feelings, emotions, thoughts. That is Ananda Rupam. It has these thing dharma called Dharma Bhuta Jnanam and Dharmi Jnanam. We will understand this as we go along. What are the differences between Dharma Bhuta, Dharmi Jnana? So as we go along, step by step, things fall in place. So sometimes we have questions in the beginning, but by the end of the lecture, you realize, the question is answered, right? That's what we are trying to do. Then we went ahead and said, Nityam, Pragbhava Pratiyogitve, Pradvamsa Bhava Apratiyogitvam, Nityatvam. So no, Pragbhava is also not there, Pradvamsa Bhava is also not there. They're both Abhava. What is Abhava? We had spoken in when we were doing Advaita Siddhanta. Abhava means non-existence. So you have different kinds of Abhava. So when I was born, before my birth, I did not exist in this body. Pragbhava. So there is Pragbhava. There is a non-existence of my existence before my existence. And when I pass, Pradvamsa Bhava will be there. So after I pass, I will not exist in this body. Of course, the Atma will exist. So that's what we are saying. It does not have Pragbhava and Pradvamsa Bhava. It is not born, it doesn't die. The Atma is not born, it doesn't die. It is the body. Then we talked about Anu, right? Anu is very small. Anu is basically atomic, subatomic, very small. Is it as big as the atom? No, it's smaller. Is it as big as a subatomic particle? No, it is smaller. If it is big enough for me to fathom, then it can be broken down, and we'll understand this today. Why is it Anu? Okay. So that's how we had gone down. Anutvam kathamiti chet. So then we are questioning. How is it Anu and so on. Okay. So we have come this far, and today we will start with Nityatvam. So what is Nityatvam? Sarva Kala Vartitvam, Sarva Kala Sattve. If you are saying that it is Nityam, so Pragbhava and Pradvamsa Bhava are not there. It has always existed. It is eternal. Then how are you born and how do you die? Tarka Shastra has this beauty where you question everything. So this is the question, and it asks itself. It's asking, if it is an eternal entity, then how is it born and how does it die? So the Shastra itself gives the answer here. It says, Deha sambandho maranam, deha viyogaha, maranam deha viyogaha. So janma deha sambandho. So birth is the association of Jivatma with the physical body, and death is the dissociation of the Jivatma with the physical body. That's what is birth and death. It is not. It has got nothing to do with the Atma. So na jayate, it is unborn. This Atma is unborn. It is undying. It doesn't die at any given point in time. There has never been a point where it has ever not existed, and there will never be a point it will never exist. So, O Arjuna, how can you say that you are going to kill? So, to give you a prelude of Bhagavad Gita is a part of a historic text called the Mahabharata. And Mahabharata is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful epic where Bhagavan Krishna is the incarnation of Lord Sriman Narayana as Krishna Avatara, Archa Avatara, Vibhava Avatara, and he comes down, and there is this whole epic which takes place, and there is a Dharma Yuddha, there is a war, and Arjuna is his very dear friend. And before the war, Arjuna asks Bhagavan, he's like, all my family members are on the other side, my cousins and all are there. How can I fight them? How can I kill them? And then the Bhagavad Gita is the dialogue between Bhagavan Shri Krishna and Arjuna, question and answer. One of the questions he asks is, how can I kill my own kin? To which one of the things he says, Bhagavan says is, Na jayate mriyate va kadachi nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyaha. This Atma is unborn and undying. How can you say that you are going to kill it? An intelligent man will never speak of such things where you say you are the killer, you are the doer. You realize that this is an eternal entity. Bhagavad Gita has a very beautiful, the second chapter, if you read the second chapter, a lot of these things have been mentioned by Bhagavan. And the importance of Bhagavad Gita is such that many texts, many scriptures have been written and have been conveyed, but very few have been conveyed by Bhagavan. Bhagavad Gita is one such text where Bhagavan himself says, in spite of coming as himself and saying that I am that Bhagavana, listen to what I'm saying, people are not listening to him. So he comes as an Acharya. Acharya is a guru. He comes as a guru in the Kali Yuga. The Atma is Anu. Anutvam kathamiti chet hridaya pradesha dut kramana gamana gamanana. So what it's saying is, when we were young, we would go for bird watching. So we had these seminars and so on. We had something called a bird race. So what do you do in a bird race? You have these groups, different groups, 4 or 5 different groups. You have been given a task to go out into the forest and then you spot as many birds as you can. And the ones who spot the most number of birds win. So in the bird race, what do you do? So we as kids, we will not recognize all the birds. Ornithologists are able to recognize all the birds, but we did not study as much, so we wouldn't know. So what do? You have a guidebook. So you look at a bird, you observe it. How is the beak? It's sharp, it's bent. You have 2 or 3 birds which look very similar. You will not be able to make out a difference between the 2 different hornbills if they look very similar, Parakeets. Sometimes looking at a parakeet and a parrot, you do not make out the difference. They look so similar. And from far anyway. Small tits. It's so difficult to see. And they fly very quickly as well. So how do you distinguish? So you have a guidebook. Even in chemistry, doing salt analysis and so on, you have a guidebook. And you say, okay, if it is this salt, it looks like this. If it is this salt, it looks something like this. Copper. If it's a copper sulfate, maybe it's blue in color. So maybe there is copper or maybe there is cobalt. Some things like that. So you require a guidebook. So in our Shastra as well, Shastra is a guidebook. The Vedam, the Upanishads, Puranas, Vedangas, Brahma Sutras, and the Itihasas. These are guidebooks. So when let's say we meditate, we were talking about Bhakti Yoga, the first session. We're talking about, Para Bhakti, Para Jnanam, and Parama Bhakti. You're talking about these 3 kinds of Bhakti. And before Parabhakti, you have a concept of Ashtanga Yoga. So in Samadhi, you are trying to contemplate upon the lotus-like feet of the Lord. You're trying to contemplate how He is. Hare Amma Sahasra Rekha Purukha Sahasraksha Sahasrapata Sabho Megung Sarvatas Pratvat Dattishtaddashangolam. Thousands and thousands of heads, thousands and thousands of eyes, thousands and thousands of hands. That's how He is. He's everywhere, amongst everything. How is He? So there's a description in the Vedam. Purusha Sukta is one such Suktam, which is there in all the Vedam. Rig, Sama, Yajur, Atharva as well. When I am meditating, a layman is meditating, he observes something. How do you know what he's observing is not his own hallucination or hers? So you must have a reference. So I am observing, yes, I am observing like this. Our Shastra also says he must be like this. So what I am observing must not be hallucination. That's called Shabda Jnanam. It is very important for us to cross-check with Shastram. If I see something, it may be true, it may not be true. But if I see something described also in the Shastram, then it is most definitely true. Okay? So Anu, how do we know that the Atma is very small? One of the places we can understand how Anu is small is from the Shastram. Balagra Shatabhagasya Shatadha Kalpitasya Cha. It's there in the Shveteshwara Upanishad. Take a strand of hair, cut into 100 pieces, Shatabhagasya. Then take one bit, Shatadha Kalpit, and cut that also into 100 pieces. Whatever remains, it is smaller than even that. That's how small it is. And from our Shastra also we are deriving this understanding that yes, the Atma must also be very small. So, sometimes you have a question where you say that what if I don't want to understand it through the Shastra, I want to understand it through something else? Of course, that is a very valid question, and maybe it may not be out of spite where you're saying I don't agree to the Shastras, I want to understand it a different way, but just for a logical understanding. It's very simple. A living man, and sometimes a person just dies, just passes. Everything is functional, very healthy, just gets a heart attack, something happens, and just the body passes. Everything is there in the body, and potentially that body should and can be revived. But why isn't it revived? You cut open that body completely and you will not find anything. You look through a microscope, you look through the entire body, you will not find something that is missing within that body. Except for air, of course, because he's not breathing anymore. But just at the moment of death. But there is something missing, that's why he is not alive. So that which is missing must be very small, which is you're not able to see it from your naked eye. So you infer. Anumana it is called. When I'm sitting here and then I look at the mountain opposite and I see smoke. When I see smoke, then I infer that there must be fire. When I see fire, there necessarily may not be smoke. But when I see smoke, I can infer that there is a quality of fire, there is a quality of heat there. Provided it's smoke, of course. If you are seeing a smoke as something else, there's some dust going up. But you can distinctly make out how a smoke flies. It's much faster as it rises, just because of the heat. So then you infer, because there is smoke, there must be fire. This is a form of inference. Because you cannot compare this Anu to anything else, you basically say, because I cannot compare this Anu to anything else, I infer from Shastram, I infer from a frame of logic that it must exist. Now the question is, now the Shastra is asking, Chet sarvatra sharire sukha dukhe katham anubhavati chenna. So it's saying that if this Atma is at the moment, yesterday we had talked about it, right? It's the Hridaya Rupi Gufa, the last session. It is within the heart, it is inside and it's very small, it cannot be seen, it's just there. Is how the Shastra says it is and where it is. If this Atma is here, how does it observe the entire body? Firstly, that is the first question. If it is just in one place, how can it feel the entire body? Why do I feel me to be in limitation with this body when the Atma is just in one place? So then the Shastra says, Mani Dhyumani Deepadi Name Kade Shastranam Prabha Yatha Sarvatra Vyapnoti. Just like the sun is in one place. It is just there. But the light is everywhere. It goes everywhere. When you have a candle in the middle of the room, the light is burning only in one place, but it spreads across the room and it illuminates the entire room. Just like that, the Atma is in one place, but it spreads its light throughout the body for us to feel it. Tatha Jnanam Sarvatra. So because it is in one place, it shines outwards, and because of that, just like that light shines outwards and illuminates everything, the Atma also shines outwards and illuminates the body, and we observe it through that. That is called Dharma Bhuta Jnana. To expand that knowledge through our senses that we perceive, through the expansion of the Dharmi Jnanam of the Atma from within, that is called Dharma Bhuta Jnana. And we'll understand how Dharmi and Dharma Bhuta Jnanam are there in Ishvara, and how is that different from what we are as Baddha Atmas. Okay? So, if this body is observed by this Atma, is the nail me or not? The body is me, because if I cut my hand, I feel pain. If somebody slaps me, I feel. I cut my nail, I don't feel pain. So, it must be a Jadam. But it grows. Without Atma, nothing can grow. Growth and shrinking is controlled growth and shrinking is an attribute of Atma in association with that. So, is it Chitta or Achitta? So, it is associated with Chetana, it is associated with Chitta, with the Atma, but it in itself is Achitta, just like this body also. It is associated with the Chitta, but by itself it is Achitta. That's why when the person dies, the Chitta moves on, the Atma moves on, and the Achitta remains, and it deteriorates and goes back to the soil from where it came from. They say that when the prana leaves the body, it leaves either upwards or downwards. And sometimes if it's leaving upwards, then before they pass, they vomit. If they leave from downwards, they'll relieve themselves. And but there is, and the Atma doesn't leave by itself. It leaves with the pranas, all the prana, apana, vyana, udana, samana. Then the upapranas as well, except one prana, the Dhananjaya, remains within the body. So when we cremate, we break the skull, because the Dhananjaya is still here. We break the skull to let the Dhananjaya upaprana also escape. Shastra says so. When the doctor feeds you medicine, gives you some medicines for the ailment that you have, he doesn't go back and teach you the MBBS before you take the medicine. You see, you don't have to study why and how the molecular integrity of the medicine is going to help you, how it is dissipated within the body, how can you intravenously inject it, okay, do you eat it? You don't have to learn all of that. Yet when you consume it, it helps you. So Shastra is like that. If you understand it, well and good, it's satisfaction for the self. Don't understand it but follow it, it is still good, because like that medicine, without understanding also it works. Does not mean you should not understand it. There are numerous platforms upon which you can rely to understand the Shastra. But you shouldn't limit yourself to just the understanding. You must go beyond that and try and understand to the best of our abilities. Now the question comes, if the Atma is only in one place and it is expanding, why is it limited only to the body? If Atma is expanding everywhere, why isn't it expanding everywhere? Why is it limiting to the body and each body? The ant does not feel me by itself unless it comes in contact. Why not? The Atma lives in one place. It expands through the form of Jnanam. So Atma is Jnanashraya, as we'll go and understand. So there is a story of Mandana Mishra and Shankaracharya. So in the 7th century, we had a great sage, Adi Shankaracharya, and he is the propounder of Advaita Siddhanta. So Shankaracharya went on a Padayatra throughout India. He walked all across India and he debated with different people. And one such another Acharya in the north of India. His name was Mandan Mishra, and his wife was Ubaya Bharati. And he followed the sect of the Karma Mimamsa. Okay, so Karma Kanda and so on. Rituals and offering to devatas and so on. Shankaracharya went, and it is said that the story goes like this, where Shankaracharya reached Mandan Mishra's house. Shankaracharya wanted to debate. So what was the he said, I want to debate Shastrartha we want to do, and you debate from your point of view of what you think is correct, and I will debate from my point of view. Whoever loses will become the disciple of the one who wins, of the other. That's how Shankaracharya gathered disciples. He went, and he never lost a single debate. So it is said that they started the debate, and it went on for apparently 14 days. And they put some parameters, and the judge of the debate was Mandana Mishra's wife, Ubaya Bharati. Then by the end of the 14th day, Mandana Mishra he realized that he's losing now. So he was accepting defeat. But Ubaya Bharati, she was a very, 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 very intelligent herself. So just before he accepted defeat, Ubaya Bharati said, no, he has not lost yet. Because a wife is an Ardhangani. He is the better half of the husband. We are not two different entities. So if he wins, I win. If he loses, I lose. So until you beat me, we have not lost. So Shankaracharya agreed and said, okay, I will debate with you also. He has lost, I will debate with you. So she said, you have debated about everything. You have not debated about the marital rules of life, the Grihastha Ashrama, the Kama Shastras. So you debate with me. Now Shankaracharya took sannyasi when he was very young. He took up the sannyas ashrama when he was very young. He became an ascetic very young. So he doesn't know anything about marital life. He has no idea. So he said, I will debate with you. I have no idea. But you give me a month's time. So to which Ubaya Bharati agreed. And then Shankaracharya is said to have gone into a cave and told his disciples, you sit outside. Until I come out, you don't come in. And do not let anybody inside. These are the two things he said. Do not come in and disturb me until I come out. And do not let anybody in, including yourselves. So he went inside, and he entered a dhyanam where he removed I don't want to get into the details of how the prana and so on work. He keeps one prana, he removes the rest of his pranavayu. At the same time, there was a king in the nearby kingdom, and he had gotten bitten by a cobra. Very important that it was a cobra, because the cobra venom has certain qualities supposedly which can be manipulated by yogis. Now, and just at the moment the prana of the king left his body, Shankaracharya entered that body, and for a month he remained within that within that body and learnt of the various aspects of the marital life and so on. And in a few days, the intelligent people in the kingdom, they realize that this is not our king. There is somebody else in it. But we want this man. He's a very nice man. We don't want the king to die. So we must find the person who is actually in the king and kill that man. So he remains in this body. But anyway, then Shankaracharya returned, left that body. That body obviously died and came back. However, at any given point, the Atma could control only one body. At any given point, an Atma can control only one aspect of one action. So that is something called Bhoga Virodhi. So that means that at any given point in time, an Atma can only do one thing at a time. So then that completely dissociates itself from the concept of Advaita Siddhanta, where you are saying there is one Atma and we are all the Chit Chaya of that Atma. Advaita saying Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahma Ivanapara. There is only Brahman, and that is the absolute reality. It shines upon these bodies, and due to Maya, there is Ajnana that is developed. And because of Ajnana, we feel ourselves to be these individual entities, but there is only one Atma. But now you are saying that one Atma can only control one thing. So if it is not a bhogi virodhi, that means if I am feeling sad, everybody should feel sad at the same point in time. If I am feeling happy, everybody should feel happy. If I get up, everybody should get up. If I sit down, because Gyan Ashraya is the Atma. So whatever one Atma does, everything should do the same thing. So the pramana of this is there in another story in one of the Shastra. There is a Saubari Rishi was there, and Saubari Rishi was requested by a king, and he had 50 daughters. 50 daughters. The overpopulation began all the way in those days. He had 50 daughters, and he wanted all the 50 daughters to marry Saubari Rishi at the same time. So Saubari Rishi said, okay, all right, I will marry all of them at the same time. So because if you're marrying one after the other, one would become the oldest wife, and one will become the youngest, and there will be partiality probably. So he said, I will marry all of them. So what Saubari Rishi did with his yogic prowess, he became 50 bodies. And he married all the 50 daughters of Mandata Raja, the king, at the same time. This is a Puranic tale. But what is observed is when Saubari Rishi got up, all of them got up at the same time. When he sat, all of them sat down at the same time. So to show the Atma is only one. So at any given point, the Atma can only do one thing, but it can only expand through the knowledge. So it can associate with different bodies by acquiring that knowledge, just like it acquires the knowledge from the sense organs of this body. But at any given point, it can only be one individual entity. So if Atma was only one, then everybody should have, all the Jiva Atma should do the same thing at all given points, should feel the same thing at every given point in time. And because that does not happen, we say then the Atma must be more than one. And Jiva Atma must be many. And each of them having its own physical body. That is the difference here, right? Now we are just making some distinction between Adi Shankaracharya Bhagavapada, his with Advaita Siddhanta, and here Vishishtha Advaita Siddhanta. Any questions so far?
You were answering them slowly.
Okay. Great.
Maybe only one that I had when you said that Atman is small, because it's invisible. I don't quite understand why necessarily it's small. Maybe it's big, but it's just invisible.
When you say something is big, what is big? Correct. So there must be a concept of perception. Even light, unless it reflects upon a surface, you cannot see it ideally. That's the reason why the space is dark. Not because there is no light, but there is nothing there to reflect the light.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? Now, when we look at, let's give an example of the air. We say this air is invisible, but it exists.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the comparison we are making. See, there is an invisible air and it's a lot. There's a room full of air, but it's invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Now you are saying Atma is invisible and therefore it must be small. But the air is perceivable through the molecules in it. So what are the 5 points of perception? It should either be physical. See, if it is non-physical, then you cannot perceive it. Because even, the particles of light are called photons. So even it's either in a wave form or a particle. In either one of them, it is a physical entity which can be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a substance to Atma, it must be perceived. It could either be felt, you could either see it, you could taste it, you could smell it. Let's say it's odorless, it is tasteless. Sense organs can perceive it. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's correct. That's what we are saying. It cannot be perceived by any of our sense organs directly.
Mm-hmm.
And because it does not have substance, you know that it is not big. You see, even though I cannot see air, I can perceive it, and therefore I say it exists. Does that make sense? I cannot see it, I cannot feel it, but it exists because I can perceive it.
Okay.
We are saying that it is small because we are not able to perceive it.
Yeah.
But how small is it?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how small is it? So the answer is, you cannot compare it with anything else. So you cannot say how small it is.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah,
make-
okay, I understand it. I was just thinking about it as small in like size, but if it's small in perception, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a source of light, let's say you take a candle, for instance, a small wick, you take a thin wick and you light the candle. And you see the flame, and from the flame you see the light around. But where is the source of the flame? Can you pinpoint the source of the flame?
Mm-hmm.
It is just a point from which the light emanates and the radiation emanates. Correct. But the source in itself is very minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, because the Shastra, now, we are saying we cannot perceive it, we cannot see, we are not able to feel it and so on. How do you know if it is so big that we are not able to see? And then we say, a Shastra says so. A Shastra is saying it is small. And we are, as comparison to what the Shastra is saying, it is directly observable. We are able to observe that yes, it is small. And therefore we say it is small. Actually, as we move ahead, we'll understand why it is small as well. Why should it be small? Why should it not be big? So avyaktam nama ghatapatadi grahi chakshuradya agrahyatvam. So what is avyaktam? Avyakta, what is that? So vyakta akha, vyakta indriya. So it cannot be perceived by these senses. That's what I just mentioned. Like a ghatapata, like the things that we see around. Ghata is basically utensils and vessels and so on. Pata is the clothes that you wear. So it is not like these clothes and these vessels that you see around us, which can be sensed by our sensory perception. It cannot be perceived. From our chakshuradi, like eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, it is agrahyatam. It cannot be observed. You cannot perceive it through these. So therefore, it is called avyaktam. So this atma is also avyaktam. Then it is achintyam. You cannot compare it and say it is like this. We had mentioned this in the last session as well. So when I say that this pen is like the one I had when I was 7 years old, so similar, I really like this pen. You compare it with something. Atma is an entity which cannot be compared to something. You cannot say it looks like this, it feels like this, it tastes like this, it smells like this. You cannot.
So, Dev, is the Jiva Atman non-physical then?
Yes. So you cannot say it is non-physical also, but you cannot say it is like this. So,
Okay. Yeah.
because when you say non-physical, basically we are saying nirgunam. So with no attribute at all. So is it nirgunam? No, it is not. Like nirakara. There is akara, but we don't know how it is. You cannot compare it. You cannot say, this pen is like the pencil I had, something else. It looks long, it is short. You cannot compare it like that. That's what achintyam means. It cannot, you cannot imagine it to be something. Chintan nahi kar sakte. You cannot fathom it to be like something.
So it kind of flows from each other, right? Because we cannot perceive it. Because we cannot perceive it, we cannot compare it to anything else.
Correct.
Because we don't know what it is.
Just because it cannot be seen and it cannot be perceived does not mean it does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
It just means it exists in a form that I am not able to fathom it through my senses. Niravayavatvam. Niravayavatvam nama vaya vasa mudayanat makatvam. Avayava. So, niravayavam. If you look at this plug, it has these pins, it has this body, it has a base upon which you plug it into the adapter or whatever you call it. So it has parts. Atma is niravayavam. There are no parts. The body has hands, it has legs, these are parts. Atma is an entity which has no parts. Niravayavam. Then nirvikaratvam nama. So basically, nirvikaram. It has no vikaras also.
What's vikaras?
Yes. So, that was like the dramatic pause I was giving.
Sorry.
So nirvikaram, there is no vikara. So when I am young and then I grow old, there is a diminishing factor. It deteriorates. I have this pen, I use it, and then it gets old and it gets spoiled and it gets destroyed by itself. I have an apple, it starts rotting and then it consumes the bacteria and fungi, consume it and it finishes. There is a vikara. So Atma has no vikara, it's nirvikaram. However it will remain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like akara is shapeful and nirvikara is shapeless.
No.
Okay.
Akara will be nirakara. Vikara will be nirvikara. Vikaram means deterioration. Nirvikaram, there is no deterioration. Akara means there is form. Nirakara means there is no form. But it is not nirakara.
Yeah, got it.
Atma is not nirakara. There is an akara, but I cannot compare it and say it is like this. So it is niravayava.
Yeah, I understand.
Does that make sense? So it is
Yeah.
nirvikaram. There is no vikara. Now, let's understand this vikaram in a little more depth. Let's look at this earth and today's date. So in our Sanatana Dharma, we have a huge, an astronomical time scale. So we are in Kali Yugam. We are in the Kali Yugam 4,32,000 years. Before this was Dwapara Yugam, 8,64,000 years. Before this was Treta Yugam, 12,96,000 years. And before that was Krita Yugam, 70,28,000. Sorry, I'm using lakhs. 128,000 years. Okay. If you add all of them, becomes 432 followed by 4 zeros. That many years is one Mahayugam. This is the time scale. Okay. How far our solar system is from the central sun of the Milky Way. Because the Milky Way is also moving around the centralized gravitational force. Our solar system is also moving around that. Just like the Earth is going around our sun, the solar system is going around the Milky Way galaxy. In the central force of the Milky Way. So depending on how close we are to that sun, if you look at our seasons here, in the summer you're all happy, jolly and so on. Right? You like to go out, bask in the sun. And when it's too hot, you like to go inside the AC and then bask in the sun. When it is winter, it's cold, you're more depressed. If you look at countries like Norway and so on, winter is a lot of depression. The problem because there is no sun. Now you relate that to the vitamins that our body produces, and that is directly correlated with the depression and so on. There are studies which are going on right now. So it is very important for us to get certain vitamins. So we take supplements in places above a certain latitude, longitude. We take certain supplements to ensure that our vitamins are to the mark, because we do not get them from the synthesis through the sun, so the UV light. So that means just from the proximity to our sun, our body can change so much. We can be from happy to sad. Our temperaments change. The reality around us changes. With the sun, with the summer, you have leaves growing back in, deciduous forests. You're flowering, you're fruiting. Just like that, the proximity to the centralized gravitational force of the Milky Way also has impact upon our lives, upon this reality of Bhuloka. And they are divided into 4 seasons: Krita, Treta, Dwapara and Kali. These are the 4 seasons of that, just like we have seasons here. When we are closest to the sun, it is Krita Yugam. As we move away, the furthest away is Kali. And we are in Kali Yuga right now. We are towards the furthest away from that central sun, is what we understand. And each of these has many, many thousand years. 432 followed by 4 zeros. That is one Mahayugam. 1,000 Mahayugam makes one day, 12 hours of Brahma. Brahma created this universe. Sriman Narayana, Brahma, created Brahma. So Bhagavana created Brahma, Brahma created this universe. Brahma lives for 100 years. Each year has 12 months, each month has 30 days, each day has 24 hours, half a day has 12 hours. 12 hours of Brahma is 1000 Mahayugas for us. 12 hours of Brahma is 1000 Mahayugas of Bhuloka, of Dharti Lokam. So we have Manus, 14 Manus. So if you divide 1000 by 14 Manus who are taking care of these timelines, you have 71 Mahayugas under each Manu. 71 Mahayugas under each Manu. The 71 Mahayugas is called one Manavantara. So you have 4 Yugas make one Mahayuga, 71 Mahayugas make one Manavantara, and 14 Manvantaras make one day of Brahma, 12 hours. And again 14 make one night of Brahma, where there is no creation. Everybody sleeps, he also sleeps, we don't exist then at that time. There is something, the Pralaya Sthiti. Again he does Srishti when he wakes up in the morning, and again every day like that. Brahma is Chaturmukhi Brahma, 4-headed. He is 51 years old. We are in the first day of the 51-year-old Brahma. We are in the 7th Manvantara, Vaivashwatam Manvantara. Our Manu's name is Vivaswan. In this Kalpa, Shweta Varaha Kalpe, Vaivashwata Manvantara, we are in the 28th Mahayuga. 28th Mahayugam. In the Kali Yuga of the 28th Mahayugam of the Sapta Manvantare, Sweta Varaha Kalpe, 51st, the second half of Brahma's life. That is one Brahma. Millions and millions of Brahma have come before him. Millions of Brahma will come after. There is no Adi na Anta. Adyav Brahmanaha we don't know. Adyav Brahmana we know. We know this Brahma. We don't know how many Brahmas have come before. We don't know how many Brahmas exist at this point. There are 4-headed Brahma, 16-headed, 32, 64, 10-headed, so many. Anginat. We don't know how big. All of these Brahmas are born and they pass and they are born. It all would have happened when Sriman Narayana blinks once. By the time Bhagavana Sriman Narayana blinks once, all of this would have already happened. So look at the magnitude. So it is unfathomable, the magnitude of this infinite existence. So how infinite are we? It is very important for us to understand. How infinite are we? What is infinity? If I can define infinity, if I can say that yes, infinity is this much, then it is not infinite, it is finite. So let's understand this theory of infinity a little more. If something is infinity, then all possibilities must exist. Infinity is such that a possibility of no possibilities must also be a part of the possibilities of all possibilities. So everything that can and should and can be thought of, which can and could have happened, should and will have happened. So today I am sitting here. After this session, I will leave. There must be a possibility, because this existence is an infinite existence. There must be a possibility in another parallel universe where I am sitting here and I leave in the middle of the class. There must be a possibility. There must be a possibility where I leave and come back. There must be a possibility I leave and never come back. I happily leave. I angrily leave. I don't live at all. I start dancing. I don't think it happens in any universe actually where I'm dancing. But you see what I'm trying to say. Infinity means that in every parallel universe, everything should have and can have and would have happened. And therefore it is happening now. So if any decision that I make, every contrary decision should have also been made. Could have also been made. And would have also been made. That is the state of infinity. That means if I am making I'm making a decision one way over another way, there must be a parallel universe making a decision another way over this way. And another universe making no decision at all. So there must be, let's assume that there must be at least more than one universe like this where we are sitting in exactly the same position doing exactly the same thing. But that universe in every given point in time, the thing that Dev Narayan is doing is different from what this Dev Narayan is doing. In every given point in time. And that many parallel universes should exist. Because it is infinity. So let's pause. Suddenly we pause now. When we pause, then there must be numerous existence where we are exactly here and we are, imagine that we have paused all these realities where this is happening, not the others. Every decision we make differs from the other decision, therefore it must branch out. And there must be some which they are making the same decision, so they branch out somewhere later. Provided, let's assume there are only two and they branch out. If they branch out, who is making the decision? Am I making the decision or am I the person who is doing the action? Does that make sense?
No. Yeah. No, you're not doing. You're not taking the action.
Yes. But I am doing the action.
Yeah.
But am I only doing the action or am I the person who makes the decision for the action as well? So that's what I'm asking. So I'm asking you, am I the person who is making the decision for the action or just performing the action and somebody else is making the decision?
Somebody else is taking the decision and we are acting actually.
Yes. How do we know?
How do we know? Like the initial of thought is not created by me first.
Okay.
It was initiated from somewhere to me to do that.
Okay.
No, it is not my creation. Like I didn't create that thought. Like thought is created somewhere.
Okay.
And pushed to me to perform the action.
Okay. So that means there is no free will, you are saying?
Yeah. It's not free will. It's a duty to do.
Okay.
That the creator.
So who is doing?
Brahma is doing.
Brahma. Okay. So let's look at it this way. Let's take all the possibilities. So let's take a possibility where you say, I am the doer. Does anybody have any more comments? And then I'll go ahead. Okay. No problem. So let's say let's assume that I am the doer of the action. So when these two parallel timelines split, where the action now changed because of butterfly effect. No, if I make a different choice, then everything that follows will also be different from what this situation is. And it will slowly branch out, correct? Every situation can make a difference. So if I make a choice where I say that I will do one thing over another, am I in control of that or am I not? So if I say if I'm not in control of that, who is in control? So you say that something other than myself must be in control, obviously. Because if you say I am in control, then if you are in control, then why do you do things that get you into trouble? If you are the doer of the action, then why are you born in a family where you are poor? Why are you born into a family where you have ailments? Why are you born into a situation where there is a war? If you are the controller of the action, you will not do something like that. Yes, so if we were the controller of the action, we tend to do things that minimize pain. Everything that we are doing tends to minimize pain. In spite of that, we experience pain. If we were the controller of the action, we would be the controller of moksha also, correct? But we are not. Because we are doing the action and we are in this samsara. So then you say, I must not be the controller, I must be the doer of the action. So then there must be another who is controlling these actions. He is controlling everything. So now that must be infinity, correct? Because the controller must also have an infinite expanse. Because this as an entity is a finite entity, this body and mind complex. And every action that is performed through Brahma, as an outcome of the creation that is made by Brahma, every other creation made parallelly must also work in tandem with what is happening now, and that must diverge, because every possibility is a possibility in an infinite series of existence. If that is the case, then then we say that if I were the doer, then I would control my actions, but because my actions are not in my control, then there must be another entity who is controlling, and even though it appears that I am the controller of my action, I am not. Because many unwanted things happen. If I was the controller of the action, then unwanted thing wouldn't happen. If there are two entities having contrary points of action, then only one will prevail, or both will, or neither will prevail. Then again, it is not in your control, correct? Therefore, you say that because there is a control and I am not in it, there must be another entity in control. And that must be Bhagavan. Now, this existence is eternal, Nityam, because it is infinite. So how big must Bhagavana be? If his expanse is infinity, does Bhagavana know of his own expanse? Now let's understand what infinity is here. If you take, let's say you are making measurements in centimeters. You're trying to measure how many centimeters this TV is, or how many centimeters this TV, how many millimeters. If you're making measurements in, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, a kilometer is infinity. Because it's a comparative. Infinity is a comparative construct. Infinity is that extent which you cannot fathom. If you can fathom, it is not infinity, it is finite. Comparatively, say a millimeter to a millimeter, a kilometer is an infinity. So there are degrees of infinity here now. So for us, Bhagavana is infinite. Because it is an incomprehensible extent of existence. It is not, my body-mind complex is not able to comprehend the vastness of Bhagavana. So do the Vedas understand how the expanse of Bhagavana? How infinite is he really? So the Vedam, they say, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. So the Vedam started going in all directions to see where Bhagavana ends. They kept going, but they couldn't reach the end. And they thought that if they keep going, they'll get lost. So they came back. Aprapya manasa, it is not perceivable, the expanse. The infinite existence of Bhagavana must be such that Bhagavana himself should not be completely able to realize that infinity, because then the moment you realize it is in a finite construct. He must realize that it is infinity, but he may not be able to realize the borders of that infinite existence. Because the borders limit the existence and it is not infinity anymore. That is Nityatva. Must have existed in a point where there is no point of existence. That is, the moment you remove time is a framework. Again, it's a relative framework, correct? Before and after, if you don't change, there is no before and after. There is change, therefore there is an understanding of before and after. So when you don't change, does time not exist? No, it exists, but it doesn't work upon you. Because you remain without change. From the moment you are born till the moment you die, you keep saying, I am, I keep existing. That consistent state of saying that I am, I exist. That is Nityatvam. Unchanging. There may not ever be a beginning to this existence, and there will never be an end. It will forever exist, because in a state of infinite existence, where is Nityam, there cannot be limitation. And that state of no limitation is Nityatvam. And before this body also it should have existed, and after also it will exist. And it will never stop existing. Okay, so it's a little off topic, but so the question is, will this happen again? What we are doing? Will this happen again? If this existence is Nityam, that means there is no end and no beginning. That means the possibilities have no end and no beginning. There are infinite possibilities. That means this would have happened before, just the way we are talking right now. And this will happen even later. Every kalpa there could be something like this creation. The difference is, if this body, if this Atma attains moksha, another Atma will enter this body, and this thing will happen. Another Atma will take care of this body, but exactly this will happen. And it could happen again and again. You'll be born to the parents in these same bodies, through these same bodies, and if you attain moksha, some parameters are there to attain moksha in this life. If you fulfill that and you attain moksha, next time this creation happens, that Jivatma will enter this body, and every Jivatma that enters this body in this framework will attain moksha. Because this framework is an established framework through which you attain moksha. That is the beauty of the creation. And there are infinite possibilities, therefore infinite creations. And therefore infinite Jivatma trying to attain Paramatma. And they try different bodies based on their karma. And when Bhagavana wills it, because only he wills, we realize that if we were willing, then we would have attained moksha ourselves. Since we don't will, it must be him that wills. And when he wills it, you attain moksha. And this will is called Nirhetu Kripa. Without any cause, he gives you moksha. Nirhetu. There is no, he uses one small thing. Sometimes when you're walking, you see a small ant and you say, I should be careful, let's not kill that ant. Everything in the world that you have done is wrong. Hurt people, kill people, whatever you have done. One day in one of your thousands of lives that you have caused and caused misery to the populations of the world, one day you look at an ant and you spare that ant and you walk over. Bhagavana will use that as a reason to provide you moksha. The smallest thing he will take and give you moksha. That's how Kripalu he is. That is called Nirhetu Kripa. Moksha can be attained through that. Attainment of moksha is what? Now we'll understand slightly, little bit. Moksha means at the moment this Jivatma can expand to the expanse of this body through that Dharma Bhuta Jnanam. Moksha, when you reach Bhagavad Prapti, that Atma can expand to that infinite cosmos. Does that make sense? It feels, the entire reality is in the grasp of this Atma. That is called moksha. The Atma can see everything. Whatever Bhagavana can see, whatever Bhagavana can perceive, that extent of perception comes to the Jivatma also. Does that make sense? That kind of Atma is called Mukta, Muktatma.
then when we also have that kind of Atma, then why can't we foresee things, or why don't we understand things in prayer?
Because it is covered. The ability for the Dharma Bhuta Jnanam to understand anything further from this body is contained by the gunas of this body. So to expand and understand Paramatma, to expand this consciousness, everything is important. The kind of food we eat, Sattva Gunam, it'll come ahead. We will understand what is limiting. I think in the next session I'll really get into what is it that is limiting this body-mind complex from attaining that Paramatma right now. Why am I not able to realize this entire existence to be part of me? Why am I limited? I think we have overshot by quite a bit. Have we? Anyway, we have. If you have any questions, go ahead. I would have liked to finish a little more. There's a lot more, but it's okay. After 1 hour, I don't know if all of you are, in this frame of mind to take in more Vedanta.
Yeah.
It gets
It's
difficult
hard to
also.
listen after an hour.
Yeah, I know.
One on moksha, Dev. Is moksha the same as enlightenment? Can you interchange those terms?
So enlightenment is to bring forth light upon yourself, is I think the meaning of enlightenment in the English. Moksha, and because of that I don't know what enlightenment is really. I don't know what it's really referring to. Each word in Sanskrit has a very specific derivative, and it means a very specific thing. So moksha basically can mean removal from pain. That's also moksha. Removal from tapatraya. Adi Daivik, Adi Bhautik, and Adhyatmik. There are three tapa. The three kinds of pain are basically divided. I will get to that also in the next session. When we say moksha here, it is attainment of Bhagavan. I don't know if enlightenment is saying. See, let's say enlightenment is a very specific word used generally in what Buddha achieved. Buddha attained enlightenment is what we say, correct? Now moksha is of what? Moksha is of the Atma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. Thank you, Dev. So
Now,
I'll just...
wait. Let me finish this. Again, that was a dramatic pause. So moksha is of the Atma. Now, generally, when we say Buddha attained enlightenment, let's use this framework. Buddha attained enlightenment. Moksha is of the Atma. In Buddhism, there is no Atma. Then what attained enlightenment? So then enlightenment must not be moksha. You see the parallel equation we drew. Moksha is attained by the Jivatma. Buddha attained enlightenment. These are the two parallel equations. Buddha attained enlightenment. In Buddhism, there is no Atma. Then who attained enlightenment? Not the Atma. Therefore, moksha cannot be enlightenment. Because Jivatma attains moksha. If there is no Jivatma, you still attain enlightenment. So moksha cannot be that which is enlightenment. So you cannot draw parallels between each of them. Nirvana. They also use the word nirvana. Again, nirvana is a word used for moksha instead of moksha here in Sanatana Dharma, in Astika Darshana. Of course, in Buddhism also nirvana has been used. Nirvana, vana means arrow. Nirvana, so that which cannot be struck by any arrow, which cannot, you have foregone all pain and misery. So yes, in Buddhism also you attain a state of nirvana because it's shunyam. You say that everything is shunyam, therefore there is a state of nirvana. But here, nirvana means after you attain Bhagavana, the pain is felt by the body, through the body. But if you realize you are not this body, then you don't feel any pain, and that is moksha. So nirvana can be moksha here, and that's what nirvana also means. But it cannot mean enlightenment, because when you say Buddha attained enlightenment, anybody attains enlightenment nowadays. And is that enlightenment? I say, enlighten me. So when somebody enlightens you, do you become enlightened? I don't know, but moksha, you don't want to say that because moksha, attainment of moksha is a very personal affair.
Okay, moksha is something when you are free of everything.
Correct.
Is moksha.
Correct. Okay.
Moksha is something when we are not bound to have anything.
Correct.
Or when we not bound to feel anything. Is moksha.
Okay.
And enlightenment, coming back to the same again, enlightenment is something we get to know something which wasn't aware of till now. Is called enlightenment.
Yes.
Like you enlightened us today with this conversation.
Right.
I mean, just to have a live example for a better understanding, like you enlightened us today with this kind of conversation today. Is my understanding correct as so far?
Yes. See, the word you're saying you're correct. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean,
okay, fine. So what you are saying is right. In the frame of in the colloquial speaking, you say you have enlightened us.
Yeah.
Is basically saying through what you have said, I have attained enlightenment. You see.
Yeah.
But that's the limitation of the language. That's all I'm trying to say. That yes, that's correct. That if enlightenment is accepting, it's receiving something. Let's assume it is receiving. Talking about Kaivalya Mukti, Kaivalya Moksha also. You say that you use Jnana Yoga. Through Jnanam you attained Jivana Mukti when you are alive, because you know through Jnana. But once you attain Jivan Mukti, you have to forego even that Jnanam. So now you have nothing. Then is that enlightenment? Now you don't have anything at all.
Yeah.
Because after you attain Jivan Mukti also you say you have to forego even the knowledge. Because knowledge is a bondage. So you have to be unbound by even the knowledge. So correct.
So it's like to attain that state, I used a channel called knowledge.
Correct. Jnanam.
To attain that, I used a channel which is well described by previous very good personalities.
Right.
Where they have described to attain that we have a way,
right,
which is this.
Right.
Knowledge is one of the way.
Right.
There might also be another ways in other universes. I don't know what.
Yes.
But coming to our thing, we have a prescribed prescription with us. If we go this way, we may get that, or we can get that. So we are trying to use knowledge as a source to attain moksha.
Correct. Definitely. There must be some knowledge. You must have a knowledge of Bhagavan at the least.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm at the moment I'm not equating that with the word enlightenment. Just for the fact that I don't know what enlightenment is really about. But moksha is about this. So instead we'll just use the word moksha. We can use the word mukti. Mukti and moksha interchangeable. Moksha is an Jivatma going to Vaikuntham. Mukti is after it reaches Vaikuntham. We'll understand this in Ishvara Prakaranam, how it works.
Yeah.
Okay? And then this Jivatma becomes a Muktatma. Okay? Jivatma has again 5 different attributes, different points. And we will understand that as well. Nitya, Mukta, Baddha, Kevala and Mumukshu. These are the 5. We'll understand this. Okay?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Rebecca?
Yes, that's a really good explanation. Thank you.
Okay. With all the drama and everything, I think all things considered. Okay, then we'll meet next week. Yo nityamachyuta padambaja yugmarukma vyamohatastaditarani trinaya mene asmadguror bhagavatosya deyeka sindho ramanujasya charanam sharanam prapadde kaudinyavam savarvariti purna chandram srimad parankusha padambaja bhingarajam rangarya deshakavadapta shudeshakatvam Shri Ramakrishna Guruvar yamaham prapadde. Jai Shriman Narayana.
Jai Shriman Narayana.